All right, Gospel in Glass, week 2. Today is going to be Jesus, and it's really exciting to be able to say that in Sunday school class. Guess what? We're going to talk about Jesus. But first off, I do want to talk about 2 things that came up after the class. I love the conversation before a class, and I really love the conversation after a class when a couple people came up to mention something to me. The first thing they wanted to, someone wanted mentioned was graven images. Where does church art fall into graven images? It's obvious, quite frankly, it never occurred to me the whole time I was really deeply into stained glass. That whole thing never occurred to me. But I do think that a congregation who's willing to write a check to the stained glass company has dealt with the question in a certain way. So the whole idea of, is art good or bad in church, and how much high art, how much, what level of art do you want? It is an interesting situation, and people are dealing with it all the time. You build a new church, what do you put in it? Do you put modern? Do you put old? Do you not put anything? You put in a lot. And if you go to St. Peter's in Rome, you see what happens when you put in a lot of art, way too much art. So graven images, yes, it can be an issue, but it obviously wasn't for this church. This church did say that its windows would be scriptural, and they would be not dedicated to donors. We don't see donor names all over them. The second question that came up, not question, but comment, was how useful stained glass windows were in the Middle Ages, especially for illiterate congregations. Even if you had some degree of literacy, that didn't mean you could read Latin, and there probably wasn't a copy of the scriptures you could get your hands on anyway. So yes, it was very important to show biblical scenes, biblical characters in a very clear way so that people could understand what their religion was about. I think we still have the same situation today. Obviously everyone can read, but I think we have a very high degree of biblical illiteracy where people just have no idea what's in the Bible. And this is another way of presenting a gospel message. So that's left over from last week. This week, Jesus. We'll talk about the big window in the back, which a lot of people think that's the only window we have. And it's so overwhelming, I can sort of understand that. And we'll also talk about what I call the chapel windows, which are the 5 windows divided among the A-level meeting room, the choir room, and Alyssa's office. Now I'm going to try to do something very difficult for me. I'm going to talk and move the slides at the same time. I can multitask. The reason I want to do this is, there's the big window. Just as a matter of orientation to this thing, it's in 5 pieces. You can see 5 panels going across. Why 5? I don't know. The kinds of things that come into these decisions are art. An artist makes a decision for an artistic reason that maybe the artist can't even verbalize. Architectural, maybe you need something in that area that would handle this kind of light. Also, you need maybe an arch. It can't only be this big because of the way, the forces and the weight of the building. I don't know, we have 5. A bunch of decoration up on top, a bunch of decoration on the bottom, and Jesus right around along the middle. The one on the leftmost is Jesus' birth. Jesus' baptism. Can you see the little dove coming down? If anything, this should entice you to go up and really look at the real thing. Jesus talking to people, Jesus in crowds. It's not really clear. Is this children? Is this people needing healed? Is this just people coming to hear what he has to say? Is this people who are hungry and they need loaves and fishes? But it's Jesus and people. The next one is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane praying. And then Jesus resurrected on Easter morning. Now, what I wanted, the hard part for me on this, and I'm just going to hit these buttons sort of general, not that you want to look at that picture in particular, because I want you to get a feel for the kind of art, because I want to talk about the artists. In about 1800 in Vienna, a movement of artists started. They were reform artists. They didn't like the way church art was going. They banded together in a semi-monastic style of living, which I assume included wives and children. I mean, they were artists, but they really wanted to reform art. They, in their semi-monastic life, they would dress up like John the Baptist. They dressed in first century clothes, and they got the derogatory term Nazarene applied to them. And what they really liked was they thought church art should go back to the basics. And to them, that meant the Middle Ages, and it in particularly meant Chartres Cathedral outside Paris, built in about 1200. And if you look at these windows, and this is one reason I'm trying to do the multimedia thing here, talking and pointing at the same time, it's a very medieval style of art. We don't see all the rich perspective that we might see, the rich, like Michelangelo making the human body almost leap off the page. We don't see that. It's sort of flat, sort of plain, do I dare say, but it's beautiful. Their movement really got a kick in the pants when one of the kings of Bavaria said, yes, I really like this, and I will build you a stained glass studio, and you can really do your stained glass to your heart's content. And it took off, but then it didn't last. As a movement, as an organized movement, the people involved in the movement never changed their ideas. They ended up emigrating all over the world. Some of them came to Western Pennsylvania and set up shops here. And we call this the Nazarene or the German Reform School of Art. When the reference I had when I first learned about this, never really talked about the reform. It was just these guys wanted to get back to this old stuff. So I decided there must be some really bad windows that I can look at, and I can see what they were building in 1790 that these guys were so angry about. And I couldn't find anything, and I couldn't find anything. And finally, I found a big coffee table book from Carnegie Library, so thick, it weighed a ton. It took up the entire front seat of my car in its size. And I thought, this book will have the ugly windows from 1790. So I'm sitting and I'm leafing through and I'm not finding them, but I'm going really fast. It's not it, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. And then I realized that everything I had said, that's not it, was it. There was a page on how to do medieval coats of arms. Because if you're going to put the titled families of Europe in your stained glass window, you need to know their coats of arms and why it's important and what the colors are. There was a section on how to do modern dress, which would include velvet, silk, fur. And how do you do that? How do you do modern hairstyles? Think about German military uniforms in the 1790s. And all the brass buttons and all the feathers, and how do you put that into a stained glass window? There was a section on domestic animals, pet dogs and cats. How do you put them into a window? There was a section on, well, there was another section. What was the other one? Oh, a lot on floral traditions. If you have this kind of plant, this kind of flower at this stage of its budding and its flowering, that means something. The section on donors. If somebody's given you all the money for the window, surprise, there would be the scene with Jesus. There's the crowd of people. And maybe not right next to Jesus, but the next guy over sure looks like the guy with the money. And the guys over here, oh, that's his children, and there's his pet dog and his pet cat. There was a lot to reform. And when you hear that, and you look at these windows, you say, sure, yeah, this is why they were going back, trying to get back to basics. And it was very popular here with Presbyterians. We're back to basics, we're back to the gospel, we're back to scripture. With Reformed folks. In these slides, Jesus is usually, if there's anything in white, it's Jesus. Jesus resurrected makes a lot of sense to be in white. There's a little bit of white on his sleeves. And that's really the only white in the window. Jesus has white on his robe when he's talking to the people. Obviously, he's in a white robe or some kind of towel thing when he's being baptized. And he's got white drapery over him, a white blanket when he's born. I think this is an artistic decision more than a theological decision. And I point it out to you because if you're ever in another church, you might see something different. And I noticed this right off the bat. The fellow from Pittsburgh Stained Glass, whose family made these windows in 1930, said that his family was very proud of the installation they had done just down the road in Washington at Church of the Covenant. At the time, it was the Second Presbyterian Church of Washington. It's now Church of the Covenant and still Presbyterian. It's practically on the campus of W&J if you're ever there. There's another Presbyterian church practically on the campus, which is the First Presbyterian Church. But I'm talking about the Gothic-looking one with all the windows. It's huge and it's magnificent. And where we have, 3 windows on each aisle, along each aisle for a total of 6. They probably have 8 windows along each aisle for a total of 16. We have, those high windows along the roof line, they probably have, again, 16. But their windows aren't the same size as ours. Any of their windows is easily 2/3 the size of our big back window. And every window is Jesus. I was there for church because I wanted to see, again, the windows in church service. And I thought it would really be rude to go out to the car and get my binoculars so I could see those high windows. So I didn't. If I ever go back, and I would like to go back and take my binoculars. The problem is Jesus is way up high, and we're not really sure what he's doing. But you start adding this up. The transept windows are original, and those also have Jesus. This whole long story is that Jesus in every single one of those windows is in pale purple, not white. And that's why I think it's an artistic decision, maybe a light decision, maybe the fact that the light is coming from high up, and would a white window, a white panel up there be distracting? Maybe pale purple can handle the light better. I don't know. The point is, decisions are made for all kinds of reasons. This is from the top of the window. There's an awful lot of decoration up there, and I've stood in front of it looking at it quite seriously, thinking there's got to be symbolism up there, there's got to be something besides decoration. I found grapes, and that's all I found. If you find something else, good, but I think that, again, is intentional. If you're looking at the symbolism up here, you are not looking at, you're distracted from the Jesus pictures below. It's beautiful, beautiful colors, not much white, very intentional. This is from the bottom of the window. There are 5 of these panels under the Jesus scenes. And again, be careful on saying, oh, there's 4 leaves of the clovers, there's 4 lobes of that sign. It's probably an artistic decision, and maybe a decision to not be symbolic of something else. And this kind of design is what ties it in with the other windows that were also put in 1930. If you've never been here in the afternoon to see this window, you are missing the chance. Come in the late afternoon. Now we're at the solstice. I think you probably have to come about 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night to see it with that low window. In the winter late afternoons, this thing is alive. You're missing a chance if you don't come in here late in the afternoon. Give a call to the church office. If the building's open, just walk on in and bask in it. It's fantastic. We do have the work records from 1930, all about contracts and costs. All those windows from 1930, that would be mainly this big back one, but also the ones along the side, the ones high up, and the ones in the vestibules. If you go up these stairs, you'll find some windows in each side. The whole piece of work cost less than $5,000. And it took about 1,500 man-hours. 1,500 man-hours, that's what, $3 an hour? I mean, if we were just to say that $5,000 was work, these guys, that's how it was. I mean, you could still be a highly skilled craftsman making 10 cents an hour and support a family. I'm going to spend some time on the other windows that are in the chapel windows. But before I go there, let's stop for questions, comments.
I have a question and comment. First, I would tell the comment. I actually proposed to Nancy in front of that window when the sun was coming through.
And she said yes. It's even
Boy,
better.
She
After it
was
gets
blinded. She was blinded. I tried to manipulate this.
She couldn't see you and didn't know who was talking to you.
I just kept saying yes.
nice.
The other comment is the third window of Jesus,
The
the
people.
teaching one. I always looked at that as that's a timeline of Jesus' life, the 5 windows. And if you look at his feet, he's on a mount. So I figured that was the Sermon on the Mount. Am I wrong about that?
Your idea is as good as anybody else's.
Because you see his feet, he's above, there's just a little mount there. And I thought that,
But you always have, I was always thinking, and the crowds came, and the crowds came. It's all through the scriptures. Yes, there's nothing to say you're wrong and nothing to say,
can we go with that?
sure. This is God's Sermon on the Mount. Other comments, reactions? Brian?
To me, I like the idea of the white being on Jesus because even though the kaleidoscope of colors is stunning, to me, my eyes are still drawn to the white because of the contrast with everything else. So that helps me focus on the figure of Jesus.
I think that's very intentional, yeah. The fact it's not anywhere else. Oh gosh, Louise first, ladies first, then Thomas. But they both raise their hands when
Yeah.
they do, you know?
I was first, though. I was just going to say how much I love the blue. I just love blue.
Yeah.
And it, so that's what springs to my mind. Every year for the preschool class, when we come upstairs to talk to the pastor, I take the children to the back window and we go through the Jesus story and explain it. But I just always say, look at that. Look how striking it is and how beautiful it is. And it really, I don't know, for me, in my mind, it's God, the Father, in the heavens. That's what I see. That's what I imagine. And I just love it.
Yeah. Okay.
So what I would say is the windows illustrate that there are no graven images. If you think throughout our church, not for
No
the
idols.
entire structure, but that window in particular, there's no crucifixion symbol. And having grown up in a Catholic church, I can assure you, in Catholic churches there are with that. So not just there, but in other images we'll talk about in a moment, we don't see crucifixion.
Yes, you
We
don't.
see the life of
Very
Jesus.
Presbyterian.
Yeah,
very
exactly.
Presbyterian.
So I would say that our windows are very, very consistent with Presbyterian theology.
I keep saying Presbyterian because I was in a Methodist church, and all up and down the side, there were large, large windows. And it was a complete history of Methodist. I mean, it had, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, some of the people common to Christians of wherever we've scattered among the denominations. But there were also a number of circuit riders in the wilds of the New World. And I thought, wow, if I had this kind of window to look at instead of Jesus, it was striking to me that you would really learn a lot about Methodists and the sacrifices they made in their history. But, we don't have that. We don't have John Calvin or John Knox. We have Jesus. Not good or bad. I mean, well, I think it's good, but I'm not going to get into an argument with a Methodist about it. Any other comments? All right. Now, the pictures, the photographs we have from the chapel windows, they're hard to take photos of because they're very big and the room is very narrow. If you think, if you're new to Beverly Heights, you might not remember, or might not have been here when that building, that part of the building was a chapel. The back of the chapel was closest to the church office. There were pews. It was the wall between the A-level meeting room and the choir room was not there. And where those, Alyssa's office and the women's robing room, there was a step up, and that was open also. So there were pews through the A-level meeting room and through most of the choir room. Then there was a small chancel up there. It had a pulpit, a lectern, communion table. It had an organ. And there's a piano in there also. You could have choir practice, sort of. Hymn books in the pews. It was good for small affairs that you might need. And the 5 windows that are in there are all Jesus windows. They were supposed to be in there in 1953 when the transept windows went in, but they didn't go in until 1957, 1958, probably because they didn't have the money. But the windows are tall, the room is narrow, so how do you get the whole window in? What a lot of these photos do not show is that somewhere in the bottom panel of the window is a Bible verse. In case you're not sure what's going on, they want you to really know. Now this one is Go Ye into all the world, the ascension of Jesus and the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world preaching and teaching. One small thing I would like you to notice, because we'll start to see this, is a cruciform halo. Cruciform means a cross. If you look at the halo around Jesus, there are 3 red things. You see them? Like a little red part equidistant around. It makes a cross. And Jesus is the only one. If you see a lot of people with halos on in Christian art, look for the one with the cruciform halo, and that's Jesus. Everybody else just has a plain, unadorned halo. Jesus gets this. This is a very different style of art. This is from Hunt Stained Glass Studios. It's also a long-standing Pittsburgh art stained glass firm. In fact, if you're taking, what is that, Carson Street between Station Square and the, what is that bridge? The high level, no, the other one, go the other way.
Smithfield.
No, going the other way, towards, beyond the stadium, the big one.
West
End.
West End Bridge. Yeah, if you go on Carson Street, going that way, you'll see a stained glass firm, and that's Hunt Stained Glass. Obviously not part of the German Reform movement, because their glass is their art is a different style, but it still works. I mean, it's still good. I do appreciate that these windows have the Bible verse on them. The other windows were so obvious, except for the Sermon on the Mount major discussion. But it's nice for this. This one's Go Ye into all the world.
Are we moving left to right, Katie?
We're moving from the back of the room to the front of the room, from the copy machine up to Alyssa's office. But if you go in there, you will be able to see the verse and you'll know exactly. This one is Suffer the little children to come to me. Jesus has a cruciform halo. The children don't have halos. The same kind of color schemes. Beautiful window. I mean, they're all beautiful. I could say that all the time. Why don't I just say that and nothing else? This one's the baptism. Now, John on the right does not, he has a halo but no cruciform. Jesus does. You see the dove coming down. I find this window to be really rich in color because of all this stuff down here. And that's why I put it in here twice, just to see the color. The intricacies, and we can talk about this a little bit later. It's not constant color. I mean, within the panel of glass, there are shadings, gradations. The baptism. This was Jesus in the temple when he's 12. It's called My Father's House. He's 12 and he still gets a cruciform halo. see is, I like that wide-eyed, wow, big wide world. This one's the miracle at Cana, water into wine. Have you ever really looked at these before? Go. And go in the morning to see these. They get the eastern sun. And we brought our stuff over to be shredded yesterday, and I said to Jack, there's a couple things I want to check on these windows. And I had forgotten how beautiful they were at 10 in the morning. Gorgeous. Now, on the easel board, I simply have recorded what these are, just in case you forget what the 5 scenes are depicting. Because one day, before I knew that this was going to be gospel in glass, I was in the chapel, looking at them, the chapel meeting room, walking back and forth, going here and there, I had some papers. I was very active walking around, and my eye caught the opposite wall, where the Beverly Heights mission and vision statement is in big, I don't think it's still there, but it was in really big letters there for a long time. Beverly Heights pursues 5 practices that we believe are essential for the life and ministry of the church. With the redo of the church's website, these things have been rephrased, but it's the very same information. And I got this off the current website. Worship to enable the congregation to glorify God. Discipleship to nurture believers. Fellowship and enjoyment of familiar relationships. I love that. Rooted in Christ and as a foretaste of our eternal fellowship. Missions and obedience to Christ's Great Commission. Stewardship and the faithful management of God's good gifts. It's really hard to beat. There's no controversy here at all. I mean, duh. But that day I was really thinking of the windows. Why these windows? What's going on here? And I happened to see this, and you are free to disagree with this, but I see a connection between these 5 practices, or at least 4 of them, and the windows. And I think that speaks, not that people in 1957, 58 were thinking in terms of mission vision statements, and not that people in the 1880s and 1890s thinking in mission and vision statements were thinking of windows, but I think it speaks to the heart of the congregation, that we are of one mind across the decades. You are free to disagree with this. Don't beat me up as you disagree, though. As I was looking at this, my father's business, that's worship. I mean, there's a tie in there. Suffer them to come to me. Discipleship. We are discipling our children. The wedding at Cana, familiar relationships, and a party. Go ye into all the world, missions. I'm having trouble hooking stewardship up. It might be a bunch of hokey, but I do think it speaks to a continuity of thought. I'm not getting beat up. This is good. There's one duplication. This is the baptism window from the back window, the rear window. It's duplicated in the chapel. I don't know. Did they intend that? Was that a mistake? Was that intentional? You'd think we'd have the Lord's Supper someplace if we're going to do the 2 sacraments of the church. But, hey, we've got baptism twice. Okay. When Hunt in 1953 was putting in its bid to get the work for the transept windows and the chapel windows, they said, we have 13 topics we could do for those chapel windows. And these are their 13 topics. The marriage feast, parable of the sower, Good Samaritan, Pharisee and publican, Lord's Supper, presentation in the temple, labors in the vineyard, blessing little children, pearl of great price, ascension, the Great Commission, baptism, birth, Sermon on the Mount. That's mostly the wording that Hunt put in his letter to the church, here are 13 ideas, and we need 5. Guess what? They didn't pick 5. And I'm not really sure. The marriage feast, was he referring to Cana? I don't know. Blessing little children, we got that. So for the children company. Ascension, Great Commission, baptism. A lot of these others are stories Jesus told, not what Jesus did. And that might be part of the thing going on. But, they specifically didn't pick Sermon on the Mount, but they picked these others. And then we added to them, well, presentation in the temple, I always think is that right after birth. I don't think of that as the 12-year-old thing. So go ye into all the world, we've got that, ascension, suffer them to come to me. This is my beloved son, baptism, my father's business, that's the one. And the miracle at Cana, which might be what Hunt was referring to as a marriage feast, it might not. We don't know why they chose these. I could kick them. Wouldn't it be fun? Why these? I mean, it's still a very complete, is it complete? I put the question to you, what would you include instead? What would you take out? If you had 6 windows, what would be the 6th window? What is the obvious thing that we need? There's no right answer. There are 5 windows probably for reasons of architecture and design, how the room is sized. And that's probably why it's limited to 5. Because the original plans had 5 windows in 1953. They did not cut out new holes in 1957. Nobody wants to take a
Wouldn't separate.
I think
Wouldn't
it's
separate.
probably,
supper.
probably too hard to do with all the people.
might be, yeah,
You know, you find they have this tiny,
yes.
thick journal.
And you wonder if you can even have Jesus with the cup and the bread. You don't know, yes, but I think that might be a reason, not if they wanted to put 12 people in, these windows don't handle 12 people. That's a artistic question. Nancy?
I wonder if they had some visual spec of each. I mean, I wonder if they had something that you could say, oh, this one's striking. Or,
Yeah.
oh, this, I don't know.
Yes, no? Karen?
So wait, this was the list that the vendor gave to the church. So if they suggested Lord's Supper, they probably could do it, right?
In some respect, yes.
Somewhere. Oh, somewhere in the church.
Well, no,
in
this
general,
is for
or
that
part.
room. They would have a vision of how they wanted it. We don't know if this came with a,
Could it be that maybe, with the concerns around graven images, the Lord's Supper would be something that maybe that kind of crossed a line for what we were willing to accept about depictions of Jesus?
it could be. We'll never know. And I really, when people are making these kinds of decisions, it can be very useful, not just because you're curious, but who are we as a church? What kind of thoughts are going on?
Just to be clear, like you said this, but just to be clear, the vendor that did these windows was not the same as the vendor that did the windows in the original.
That's Pittsburgh stained glass versus Hunt stained glass. Hunt also did the 2 transept windows with the Old Testament scenes and the apostles. That's also Hunt, but it's 4 years earlier by
So
the
it's
time they
different.
pulled themselves together to do
Different
this.
artists and also a different style and a different time,
Very different.
almost
Very different.
30 years separated.
Margie Pine, folks know Margie, she grew up in this church. She was a child when the transept windows went in. I didn't talk to her about the chapel windows, but she did mention to me once, she remembers her mother fussing when the transept windows went in with this style of glass. She didn't like it. Why didn't they match? So it was not universally accepted for whatever reason. I don't know Margie Pine's mother. I mean, maybe she was an artist who had some other considerations, but it didn't fit quite right. I think when we come in now, we say, sure, yeah, it's 2 different things, but it's okay. And I think they've handled matching of the subject material and matching of the colors very well. And whoops, going back to this one. Have you ever heard of Blanco glass? No. It turns out that in the world of art glass, Blanco is a big deal. And if you're the kind of person who likes to buy really expensive, beautiful vases, glassware, bowls, lamps, Blanco is a place you should look. They do beautiful, beautiful work. They've got a shop in Milton, West Virginia, which is between Huntington and Charleston. At the time, well, let's go back 20 years, and sometime in the 20s, a Blanco married a Hunt. So there was this tie-in between the two companies. Not formal, but obviously there's some relationship going on there. So when our windows went in, it was happening that Hunt was using a lot of Blanco glass. Blanco was one of the last firms in this country to do hand-blown stained glass. Doesn't make any sense, but what they really could do very well is color. And they're really good at gradations of color. They make it, something's very hard for the craftsman. And I bring this up here because I want you to see the gradations of color. And I noticed this especially yesterday when I was here, when Jack and I were here at 10 o'clock in the morning. I knew I wanted to say this, and I thought, I'm going to go look and double check. And by gosh, in bright sunlight at 10 in the morning, it's all different. But when John Schisler took these photographs at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on a fall afternoon, or winter afternoon, it was fall, wasn't it? Fall.
No, he took them in spring.
Spring. Okay.
Late,
Had a different-
late winter, early spring.
Okay. He had a different style of light, 2 o'clock winter, early spring. But I want you to notice things like that purple. This, there's a little, it's not the same, it's not uniform. This is not uniform. And I was talking this week with my friend Mike McElhatton. He's not one of our McElhattons, but he's HB's craftsman. And I said, Mike, I've got all the wrong words. I've got words like imperfection, not uniform. And he said, don't worry about it, it's okay. But that imperfection is what makes it perfect. And these kinds of things make it sparkle. And if you're an artist, you can maybe explain why this delights your eye. It's not flat. There's a church up in North Hills, Ingomar United Methodist, beautiful church. It's new, relatively new, last 25 years. They've got a stained glass right over the chancel, and it's perfect, and it's horrible. It's a plain, I mean, the panel, each piece of glass in that window is a perfect blue. Then it's a perfect other shade of blue. Then a perfect other shade of blue, all separated with the leading.
Like an engineer would do it, huh?
I didn't say that.
Now, I've noticed that shading many times, and I've appreciated it because in my mind, I picture the artist going through great measures to pick just the right part of the glass to cut for that one piece, and in the process probably waste a lot of glass. So they're not necessarily looking to get the most out of it. It reminds me of my mother doing quilting, and she'll have different fabrics. She's got thousands and thousands of fabrics, but she'll go and painstakingly pick a part of a fabric to fit a particular piece on a quilt in just the right way, and not necessarily making the best use out of the fabric, but it works artistically.
Artistic.
And so I've noticed that for many hours that I've sat in the worship design team, looking out the windows and face that direction. Not because I'm disinterested, but I appreciate the shading, and I think that's, to me, that's not imperfection, that's deliberate.
Well, keeping in mind the connection between the two firms, Blanco and Hunt, I can imagine that somebody went down to Blanco and said, we're going to do these windows, and we need some colors. And here we're going to need this, and here we're going to need that. And they could really fill the order for the glass very knowledgeably. A lot of times, and we'll notice this in the transept windows, those are full-length figures with the robe going from here to here, and you'll notice that the blue changes as it drapes down, And it should. I mean, when we stand up, our clothes take on different shadings all the way down. It makes it hard. Now, we'll be talking later on about how glass is made. I could hardly get my head around the idea of hand-blown stained glass, because that's flat and hand-blown. But think, if you've ever seen a glass-blowing demonstration, yeah. They're always making a vase or a goblet or something round. Well, so they make something big and round and cylindrical. They get their super-duper glass-cutting shears for when glass is super-duper hot, and they cut it, and then they can lay it flat. Now, if in the hand blowing of the glass, they've done something, and they do it so fast you can't see it, but they're putting that gradation in as they blow it, knowing how it's going to be cut, how it's going to go here, and that the artist eventually wants this. Really? They do all this. Now, what Blanco does is they were really good at making dark green go to light green. One of the ways they did it was by making sure this had a lot of green and this had a little bit of green, and making sure this glass was thicker and this glass is skinnier, which makes a problem for the craftsman. But my conversation with Mike, it's worth every bit of effort you have to do. And if you notice these windows, all the leading is wide. If you go to the back window, you'll see this window. There's wide leading and there's skinny leading. This is all big leading, wide leading, because the person who's dealing with this skinny, fat glass would appreciate having that much more lead to work with to make it hold together. And that also gives the window a very different shape, that it's not all, there's not a lot of little bitty leading. An interesting thing. So I put it to Mike. In fact, I sent him this slide on the email, and I said, okay, so Blanco really did each one of these. And he said, well, there's some paint on that also. Oh, going back to when they cut it and they flatten it out, they get something that looks like the rake that you use in billiards or pool, a long hoe kind of thing, and they'll make sure it's all flat. But again, they're not making it uniformly flat, so there's a little bit of touch there. This is all going on super hot. And the surface on which they leave the thing to come down in temperature is a soppy piece of wood. They'll take a big plank of wood, so wide, drench it so that when the hot glass touches it, they're not setting off sparks and doing that. My question is, okay, so you have sodden wood. And I know what sodden wood with the grain, you know, it'll pop the grain up, become more. And yes, the back of Blanco glass, you can sometimes feel that it's not been done on a flat surface. Again, it's an imperfection, but it makes it perfect. Because when the glass hits all these things, the light hits it, it's going to just pop like that. I can't understand it, but. The other thing, now the paint that will go on, let's say they didn't do enough. And Mike said there's just so much going on in these colors that it's probably the artist in the stained glass studio taking stained glass paint. And this is hard because when you're all done, you really have to consider light coming through it. It's not like oil paint where you can see it on the easel, know exactly what you've got. Imagine light coming through it. Even if you have a light table, that's not the same as sunlight. And how much do you put where? How do you use this paint and then you use it on? Masterful. Mike sent me a link to a website in Germany where they were doing this, and they were going so fast. I thought, well, I can't follow this. Plus, they didn't have any narration, which was probably good because it would probably have been in German. But they did have beautiful pictures of their current installations all over the world of their glass. Comments, questions? fascinating, beautiful. I would add, I think you should go up to the chapel. It's a decent sunny day, it would be beautiful. Open one of the windows. At the bottom, there's a little thing you can open it. Feel it on both sides. Feel the back, feel the front. The way you have to reach around, you can't really easily feel the difference in thickness. But if you can figure that out, let me know, and I'll go up and try it myself. So, it's beautiful. Comments, questions?
How does it add the color to the glass?
Paint.
They just paint over it when it's cool?
Yes, yes. Just like you could paint, I mean, if you had a piece of glass in your own house and you had stained glass paint, you paint it. This is really cool. If you heat glass to 1300 degrees, it becomes a puddle. Completely loses its shape, flows off. If you heat glass to 1200 degrees, it becomes soft. The stained glass paint has actual pieces of glass in it. They know they want red paint, they'll take red glass. It's not been red because it's been painted, it's red because it's got those minerals in it when it was made. So you got red glass, pulverize it, put it in some kind of a medium so you can spread it. I mean, it's pulverized, smaller than dust, but it's still glass. So that's the paint that they've used the brush and carefully painted. They'll put it in the kiln, heat it up to 1200. What that means is that the piece of glass is soft, but so is the paint, and they fuse together. So if you look at this, it looks like it's in the glass, and it is. It will not chip off. It's now one with the glass.
Some of the glass, though, before you paint it, is already colored.
Yeah, right. You can make stained glass in, I mean, the manufacturers of stained glass, they put in, oh gosh, we'll talk about it. Cobalt, copper oxide, gold, beryl, magnesium. I mean, all these materials go in to the molten glass and become one with it, and that's what gives it its color. So then you'll take that blue glass, whatever.
Well, final, just to follow up on what Jack said, final color, because there is also, because of the oxide, there is color in the glass.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, right. There's
The
color.
artist would.
It starts off, I mean, this piece probably came from the factory in that color. And then they probably painted this shading around it. And you've got to be an artist to know how to do that. If I did it, it would look like I did it. We'll talk more about the craft of stained glass. Yeah, we'll have a time just devoted to that. So, other comments, questions?
I just have one general one, and that is that you really lost the presentation of the windows when we broke that chapel up into 3 rooms, because it's all 5 windows against the wall is much more dramatic, more impressive than a couple here and a couple here and one hidden back here over a desk. It's a shame. You know, I understand why we did it and everything, but we lost something when we didn't do that.
We needed the meeting room, yeah. It's tough decision to make. Okay. Tom, can you close us?
Yeah, sure. The only comment I wanted to make is, did you mention on the large window at the back of the church, just the number of pieces in that window?
Oh,
I don't remember hearing that. It's what, 4,100? Something like that. Individual glass pieces in that.
4,000. 4,171 in there.
171 individual pieces that are all individually wrapped,
Individually cut.
individually cut, and sewn together in that.
And
So
when they refurbished that window, they took each and every one of those apart.
Right.
And all the taming in between, on the side, replaced a few that were cracked, and then had to assemble all 4,100.
And the totality of all the pieces among all the windows, I think, was 17,000.
But that's just in the 1930s stuff. That doesn't include
Okay, right.
these other ones. We don't
So
have that.
it's really kind of mind-boggling, the artistry this way. Okay, let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the physical structure of this church, which is a manifestation of your love for us and our love for you, Lord. Just keep us mindful that we never worship a building, that it is a reminder of your love and presence in our lives, your light and darkness, Lord. We thank you for Katie's work and her interest and dedication to eliminating both figuratively and his Lord in some respects. Your love for us and what he's working with represent. For this church and for the steadfast stewardship that has guided this church for 90 years, for generations before us and generations past. As we are on approach on landing, we ask that you keep us steadfast to those things that should hold us fast as a congregation and corporately and individually. In your holy and blessed name, we pray. In Jesus' name. Thanks, folks. See you next week.